So welcome everyone. We're going to start out today with teaching literature reviews by using restaurant reviews with Lauren Ervin from Asbury University. Take it away, Lauren.
All right, thank you. It's good to see everyone at LIRT again this year. So I have a quick little presentation showing an activity I've used to try to help teach literature reviews. I know that it can be difficult to cover how to do a literature review just in a one-shot session, and this activity is designed to try to make it a little bit more simple and easy for students to understand how to write them and how to organize them, what to include, what skills are involved, that kind of thing. So this idea that I got it from my supervisor, Beth, who got this idea from Smith and Ferris 2017. This article here, they also used restaurant reviews to teach literature reviews, but they do it in a little bit of a different way. So you're welcome to check out the article later if you'd like. But my supervisor kind of took their idea and just sort of made her own. She kind of took the general concept and kind of made her own activity out of it. And then I kind of have further adapted it from her. So that's kind of how this developed. But generally, I use this activity for a online graduate level communications class I teach every November. But I have also used it for an in-person undergraduate class. I used this for a math education class I taught back in the spring. And I think I've used it again for another class. So when I teach this, use this activity for the online class, when we do the Padlet, I usually just have them do that individually. But for the undergraduates, I kind of had them do it in small groups just because I felt like as undergraduates that might need to lean on each other a little bit more. So, and this activity that I use that I'll describe in a little bit, it's kind of comes toward the end of a bigger lesson. So this is kind of like the general lesson plan I use for teaching literature reviews. Usually I start out with a Mentimeter where I have a bunch of statements about literature reviews, and some of them are true and some of them are false. And I have students choose the ones that they think are true. And then we look at the results for the full, that the entire class, from the entire class. And then I go over what statements are true, and I kind of help clear up misconceptions going into the lesson, basically. So I have that kind of as a pre-assessment activity. And then I have some slides talking about, why literature reviews are important. These are questions you might ask yourself while making your literature review. Here's the general process of writing a literature review. Usually I try to pull up an example to show them. I kind of clarify how this is different from annotated bibliographies. And then at that point, I go into the restaurant reviews activity, which is this Padlet. And after that, I usually kind of go more into detail about writing tips for literature reviews. And usually when I teach this lesson, the understanding is that students have already learned how to search in databases, usually during a previous session or a previous class the students have had with me. I've already taught that skill, but you could go into searching databases after that if that's something that you also need to cover. But just why might you use restaurant reviews when teaching literature reviews? One reason is just because restaurant reviews are pretty short and simple. They're really quick and easy to read compared to reading research articles. They tend to be fairly relatable. Most people have read restaurant reviews or maybe even written some in their life. And it's not exactly the same skill set as writing a literature review, but typically just the general skills that you use when you're reading a bunch of different restaurant reviews. Typically people seek out like negative reviews and positive reviews, and they might look at reviews in different on different websites. And they typically, when we're looking at restaurant reviews, we're trying to see the general trends and themes across the reviews. What do people tend to agree on? What do the negative reviews have to say about this restaurant? And that kind of helps us to form a general impression about what the restaurant is like and maybe kind of help us decide whether or not we want to go. So it's not exactly the same thing as a literature review, but it's kind of a similar set of skills. But as far as what this activity looks like, this is a screenshot of a Padlet that I use to kind of organize this activity. And I apologize, I don't have posts from students on here. I'm really good at clearing out my Padlets after I use them, and apparently that's not always a good thing. So I'm sorry I don't have student posts on here, but I have the kind of the directions up here. But I do have a bit.ly link also in the description, and this link goes to a document that has all of these reviews of this restaurant in that document that I'll show in a second. So we look at restaurant reviews for Ramsey's Diner in Lexington. And basically, what I do is I pull up the reviews and I go to the very first review, which is the Facebook review, and I read that review to them. And then I have this example post I always keep here that has just like the main key points from that review, like the key takeaways that I took away from that review. So then what I do is I have students choose one of the other four reviews, one of the TripAdvisor or one of the Google reviews. And then I have them read that one review that they choose and basically make a post on the Padlet summarizing what that review discusses, what are the key points. You could have them read all the reviews. I just try to make it pretty quick by just having them read one and just briefly make bullet point summary of what that review discusses. So then we end up with a bunch of posts under each of these other review names, and that kind of helps us to really quickly see what each review is talking about. It almost is like a really informal annotated bibliography, not quite the same, I know, as one, but sort of like a really informal one. And that kind of makes it a little bit easier to discuss these reviews and compare and contrast them when we do this. So and I have the reviews linked here. So I'll pull up, for example, this is the PDF version of it that I usually share with students, so that we have like a Facebook review here from for Ramsey's Diner, then two TripAdvisor reviews, and then we have one Google review, and then the second Google review. Let's see, go back here. And what I do basically is after they've posted on this Padlet, that probably takes about maybe 5 to 7 minutes or so. We look at everyone's posts. Like, the students are welcome to also look at the reviews themselves, but we are mostly kind of like glancing at these posts on the Padlet, summarizing these reviews. And I have students, I basically ask them to name a trend that they see across a few reviews. What do a few reviews agree on? Usually they'll point out that multiple reviews say that the pies are amazing, which they are. So they'll mention some things that are discussed across a few reviews. And then I always, after each discussion question that I ask them, I try to pull it back to literature reviews each time. So then I pull it back to literature reviews by saying, when you're looking at your research articles, you will notice that some of your articles will agree on something. Maybe multiple researchers across different articles are arguing the same. They're arguing, one strategy over another, or one type of treatment over another, or whatever it might be. So that's what we would call a research theme. You could try to organize your literature review based on, 3 different themes that you see in the research or something like that. So and then we'll go into like the next thing I tend to discuss is like, what are some contradictions that you see across these restaurant reviews? Or what's something that you see just in one review, like something that kind of makes one review unique from the others. So typically someone will mention that like one review really does not like the mac and cheese, but another review really likes it a lot. So or there's one review that talks about like dietary restrictions, but all the other ones don't talk about that. So again, I pull it back to literature reviews and I say, like, when you're looking at your research articles, it's okay if not all of your researchers and your different articles agree on everything. In fact, that's a good thing. It's good to have diversity of opinions. So I try to, explain that you should definitely point out ways that your articles disagree, or ways that they're different from each other, or if there's something that makes one article unique, definitely point those things out as you notice them. And then I also asked them to identify a gap in the information, like what's something that none of the Ramsey's reviews talks about. Like, one thing I always say is like, none of them talk about parking, so we don't have any idea of if parking is good or bad or just fine there. So whatever your students will probably mention research gaps that you haven't even thought of about these restaurant reviews, but basically, I connect it back to literature reviews by saying this is what we call a research gap. And when you're after you've found all your articles and you've looked at them pretty thoroughly, you'll probably find that there's certain things that you wish your articles would talk about that they're not talking about. Maybe they're not covering a certain population of people, or maybe they're not really covering a certain strategy or whatever it might be. So definitely point those things out in your literature review. And this last point of discussion, sometimes at this point, oftentimes I'm kind of running low on time and having to kind of like go through this quicker. And sometimes I have to just kind of come up with a few ideas and share them myself. But if you have more time, you could ask students to try to organize a literature review about Ramsey's reviews. Like if they were to be making their own literature review, what would the sections of a literature review be called? You might want to go. I have some slides reviewing how literature reviews can be organized, like thematically or chronologically, or based on like schools of thought. So you could go over that first and then have students come up with 3 titles of the sections of their literature review. So there might be like a section on the food at Ramsey's, the service at Ramsey's, the ambiance at Ramsey's, or someone might come up with like positive remarks for one section and then negative remarks for another section, and then maybe like neutral remarks or something. So that might give them a little bit of an idea of how they might break down their paper, how that kind of works in on a small scale. But just a few suggestions for things that you might consider if you wanted to do this activity and adapt it a little bit more. I have used this activity, as you've seen, kind of more toward the end of the lesson. You could try doing it more toward the beginning or middle of the lesson and just see how that goes. I tend to front load a lot of information about literature reviews first, but I have thought about trying to either maybe cut out some of those slides or maybe go through them a little bit later on, or maybe like have them there more for reference for them later. So you might end up spending more time on this activity and expand on it a little bit more than I have, or something like that. Just something to consider. You could another way you could expand on this activity is by having students write like a paragraph synthesizing these different restaurant reviews, just to kind of like get an idea of what synthesis looks like. Because I usually talk about, or at least show them an example of like, this is what a synthesis looks like in this paragraph versus like just listing a bunch of works. Like you don't want to just list what everyone individually says. You want to actually like integrate the research with its all the researchers, what they say into your paragraph. So you could try to have a little activity doing that if you wanted. You're welcome to use the Ramsey's reviews I have linked in these slides, but I do recommend using a local restaurant in your area somewhere, just to kind of make it a little bit more personalized to your institution in your area. And I have thought about trying to adapt this for annotated bibliographies in some way, like maybe using the Padlet to do something a little bit more focused on annotated bibliographies. I have another class where I just teach them how to do annotated bibliographies, and we don't go into literature reviews. So I've thought about trying to make this an annotated bibliography activity, but I haven't made it that far. So if anyone has any ideas on that or other ways you might do this lesson, feel free to let me know. And that's all I have. So if you have any questions, I can answer them now, or any comments or anything, feel free to ask. If not, my email's here, so feel free to ask me any questions or comments that come up later. So yeah, anyone have any questions or comments?
Thanks so much, Lauren. This was really great. We don't have any comments yet, but I think people are really excited about this example of an activity. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more, and I apologize if maybe you've said this already and I missed it, but what kind of classes do you do this for, and have you gotten any student response, or just can you tell from the room when you're doing this activity how students feel about it?
Yeah, I do this for a graduate level communications class that has to do a literature review, and then I also use it for a in-person undergraduate class that was math education that also had to do a literature review. That the graduate level communications class I've done this with, they also have to meet with me individually. They're required to, like the week after I teach this. just to kind of go over any questions that I have about either finding articles or if they've already found them, like how they might do their literature review. And some of them have told me that they found the activity to be helpful, that they didn't know what literature reviews even were before, and now they have more of an understanding of them. So just kind of informally, I've gotten some good feedback from students from that, and I think it helps that I also get to meet with them individually. Like it helps me kind of be able to talk things out with them more too that way. So um, yeah, so does that answer your question or?
Yeah, totally. I also was curious too, was synthesizing literature something that faculty were coming to you with, wanting you to support students with? I personally find it very challenging to teach synthesis. I think we're really good, or at least, information literacy oftentimes is really focused on finding and evaluating information, but there is a lot of student need and demand for kind of going one step further and working on their literature review. So yeah, was that a need you identified or that faculty were coming to you with?
Generally, it's something that they kind of want me to cover with the literature review. I guess it's kind of one of those things where it's sort of that part kind of almost goes into a little bit of like what like a writing center would do. But our writing center is mostly set up for like in-person undergraduate students to use. So I guess it kind of helps me to fill that gap a little bit with the graduate students of showing them a little bit of what the synthesis looks like. So yeah, I guess it was a little bit of something that was requested. I definitely don't go into as much depth with that as I do about like here's where you might just kind of analyze and look at the different sources, but it is something that I kind of feel like I should probably cover at least a little bit so that students kind of know like this is kind of what you should look for and try to do, and versus not trying to avoid doing and that kind of thing.
Awesome. Yeah. And we have a really nice comment that I'll read in case folks aren't looking at the chat. But Trina said that this is a great idea so much. I shared it with the campus writing center director, who I think popped into your session, which is great. They do this type of workshop for classes here at EKU. So yeah, definitely some positive feedback on this really creative idea. Are there other comments or questions?
Yeah, that's a great idea, though. I'm having your campus writing director take a look at this, just because, like I said before, it does kind of bleed a little bit into what writing centers do as well. So, and that might be a good thing to maybe collaborate on or something. Librarians and writing centers.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you mentioned that you would be sharing some of these materials. Do you have links that you can pop in the chat for now? And we'll also collect those to make available on our LIRT website too for folks to refer back to later.
I have them linked in the slides, but I can try to drop the links in the chat too in a little bit if you want me to. Would that work or?
Yeah, if you don't mind, while it's fresh in people's mind, they can take a look at them.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that as soon as we have our little break in a little bit.
Yeah, sounds good. Other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much, Lauren. Let's give you a round of applause. You can use the little heart reacts down at the bottom of your toolbar. Say thanks in the chat. This was really wonderful. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you.